Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. On behalf of the European Disability Forum and the Global Action on Disability Network, GLAD, a warm welcome to today's global inclusion discussion on engaging donor offices and delegation for the inclusion of persons with disability in budget, programs, and the policies worldwide. We are glad you could join us today. So, my name is Nadia Haddad. I'm an executive committee member at the European Disability Forum, representing the European Network on Independent Living. And it's my honor to be your moderator today. So I'm not alone in this. I'm joined by EDF colleagues Raquel, Erika, and Marion, who will be taking care of the technical aspects of this meeting, as well as supporting the logistics of our panel discussion and the question and answer session later on. But before we begin, maybe some housekeeping rules that we will deal with today. So please remain muted with your cameras off. There is international sign interpretation available. We also have real-time captioning in English, so activate as subtitles in the Zoom or open the external link sent in the chat box. You can use the chat box for any technical question you have, and the question and answer box for all the questions you can have on the content to the speakers. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on EDF website later on. So please also complete the post-event survey, which will be launched automatically after the meeting. And I will start already with a big thanks to our interpreters and captioner for being here today, along with all of the speakers and Raquel for ensuring that everything will go smoothly. So let's start with the question, why are we here today? Article 32 of the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability, the CRPD, underscores the imperatives for the state parties to be inclusive and to promote the participation of individuals with disability in the international development efforts. So over the years, donor countries, NGO, and delegations have implemented various strategies globally to advance the promotion of the CRPD. These strategies differ in their commitment to include persons with disabilities in the policies, programs, and budgetary consideration, and to be in line with the CRPD. However, the funding allocated to the disability-related project within the official development assistance remain considerably very low, and facing the urgent need to increase the meaningful involvement of individuals with disabilities and organizations of persons with disabilities in the International Development Initiative, which is exactly why EDF and GLAD Network are hosting today's event. So, to seek opportunities to elevate the meaningful involvement of individual persons with disabilities and OPDs in the international activities of donor and partner countries, and so to increase the right implementation of the CRPD. Our ambition today is that during this meeting, we will gain insights from the diverse departments, agencies, and delegations about the efforts to actively engage with organizations of persons with disabilities. And also, you will have the chance to explore concrete examples of enhancing inclusivity in your own work. Moreover, you will have also the chance to hear from representatives of OPDs about best practices and areas where further improvement can be made. So to achieve this objective, today's meeting is divided in two sections. We will have one section, guidance from donors, and the second one will be the experience from OPDs and allies. We are joined by 8 excellent speakers today, 4 for each session, who will achieve receive their own introduction before sharing the guidance or experience. Each speaker has between 5 and 10 minutes to present. And after the first four speakers, we will have our first panel discussion and question and answer session, which will be followed by a quick break. After the break, our final four speakers will present, with then will be followed again with another panel discussion and question and answer with the ambition to have really an interdynamic meeting today. So lastly, we will hear from our co-host, the GLAD Network also, who provide a summary of today's meeting and offer some closing remarks. So without further ado, we will go to the first speaker that I'm delighted to introduce, and he's presenting on behalf of the European Commission. We have Ms. Dorothy Bosse with us. She's the Deputy Head of the Unit of the Director General for the International Partnership from DG INPA. Please take the floor, Dorothy.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for the introduction, and hello to everybody. So I will give you a quick overview on behalf of INPA, International Partnerships of the European Commission. So why, of course, it is so important to address disabilities in external cooperation, my first point. My second point, what is our policy background? What, as a commission, what we are operating in our policies on disabilities and specifically in external cooperation. Then thirdly, what we as a commission, international partnerships can offer in terms of guidance, with the persons who are working in headquarters, but in our EU delegations being out in partner countries. And then I will just conclude on how in very practical terms, apart from many trainings we are providing, how we work on the ground in partner countries. Let me get back to the first point. And most of you know this much better than I do. My first point was why it is so important to include disabilities in EU external cooperation. Well, of course, disability inclusion is fundamental, essential to achieve the SDGs, as we all know, to leave no one behind. Today, 16% of the world population lives with disabilities, and 80% of them are in partner countries. And the numbers are increasing, the absolute numbers, because of population growth, of course, and because of aging around the world. Another reason why it is so important, of course, is human rights for all. So persons with disabilities are often living in very vulnerable situations. We know this, and their human rights must be respected. Human rights are imperative, of course. And just to make an additional comment here, we are living more and more, many partner countries experiencing living in a fragile context, which is, of course, an additional challenge on how to address the high number of persons living with disabilities in this fragile context. Therefore, we work closely with DG ECHO on humanitarian aid on how to include disabilities in their work as well. Let me just, this is my second point here, very quickly, to mention where we are operating in, meaning us as the European Union, when it comes to disabilities and EU external action. So, of course, we are part of the EU 2021-2030 disability strategy. First point here, EU context. Second point under the EU external cooperation is, of course, we are supporting the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which we consider a key driver of the disability inclusive approach. And we should underpin all work towards meeting the SDGs. So those are our leading principles when it comes to address disabilities in external EU external cooperation. This was my second point. So you might be interested what we are doing, the third point in terms of guidance. So first of all, and I'd like to mention this, that we're very proud of having this guidance note, right, which is called Leave No One Behind, Disability Inclusion EU External Action. So this is kind of our main opus. So this is like which encompasses everything, the background, the reasoning, why this is so important to us, so dear to us, and then to give best guidance, of course, to our colleagues, be it here in headquarters or in our EU delegation to mainstream disabilities. It is thought to be a very practical guide here. So how to include disabilities throughout the project management cycle, of course. Content-wise, and you might know this note to explain what I just said, like what is the situation of persons with disabilities in partner countries. So again, our policy concept I just mentioned, what we're operating in. And then we have essential disability inclusion concepts and approaches in external cooperation. You know, this ranges from disabilities being a human rights-based approach to ensure accessibility for persons with disabilities, uh, as well as collect disability data for reporting and accountability, as this is so important. Yeah, so it's very hands-on, very practical, in other words. And then, as I said, we give very pragmatic tips on each step of the project cycle on how to intervene to make it disability sensitive and inclusive. This is our guidance note. Then, of course, I'd like to mention again that ECHO has very good guidance as well on how to include disabilities in fragile contexts. I mentioned this already. And then I'd like to take the opportunity, but I'm only showing this, what is already on the screen. Thank you so much. Just to give you a flavor, I'm not going into detail here. So we, as a Commission, European Commission, so we are offering specific training around this guidance note above all, you know, be it through e-learning tools, be it through specific videos, a specific toolkit. This is all on disability inclusion in EU external action. If you go to the next slide, please. Here it goes on, and there's more to come. Yeah, so we are very active in this field. So for us, it's an important issue to be increased, and important to be more disability inclusive. Yeah, I'm not going into detail. There's one highlight we do have. I'd like to mention what you see here is the use of the so-called D marker, disability marker. So we screen every new program with a disability marker. Yeah, so this is real mainstreaming. So it doesn't stay in the narrative and in the good intentions, but it really trickled down to the program level. And we made very, very good progress over the last year since we do have it. The last slide, please. This is more like just to show you that we as a European Commission do not, of course, you know this, uh, do not only include disabilities in EU external cooperation, but overall in EU policies. When I mentioned the 2021-2030 overall strategy, of course, external action is only a chapter of it. We have a whole very comprehensive disability strategy, and this is reflected in our trainings as well. You know, so we lead by example in our own institution and in our EU policies, and they can be internal or external. I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation here. I wanted to make a very last point. It's a little bit like the fourth point I mentioned. Explain how it works on the ground when we work with our EU delegation directly in partner countries. So for you to know that firstly, we include in the in the EU delegations, we organize consultation with civil society organizations, obviously including persons with disabilities. Then on the Global Gateway strategy, you might have heard about it, the EU's connectivity strategy. there is a platform as well with civil society where organizations with disabilities are included, of course. We do have the so-called youth sounding boards, again, very much focused, decentralized on partner countries where organizations with persons with disabilities are included as well. And then obviously in our major policy documents, be it the global health strategy, be it the youth action plan, various civil society policy forums, or consultation of the financial instruments or overall budget, organizations representing persons with disabilities are always there, and they're always heard, of course. And then perhaps to conclude that ECHO as well encourages partners to pursue dialogue with local organizations of persons with disabilities. I'm coming to an end here. So we have quite a plethora, we have a quite range of activities we run, always based on our policy framework, pursuing the SDGs and based on our overall European strategy to address include persons with disabilities. I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, to give us an insight on the work that DG IMPA is doing. So next, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Vladimir Suk, who is the Executive Director of the International Disability Alliance, and he will speak today as a GLAD Network Permanent Co-Chair. Thank you, Vladimir, for joining us today, and to your team for helping organizing today's event. So the floor is yours, Vladimir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having us here today. This is a very important meeting, and I'm very pleased that I had a chance to join you all. I was invited to speak a little bit about GLAD Network, what is the history of the GLAD Network, what are some of the main achievements, and what is overall goal of the GLAD Network? Why do we have GLAD Network? So let me start by saying that Global Action on Disability, or GLAD Network, is a coordination body of donors, foundations, private sector representatives, UN system representatives that are equally committed to promoting and advancing disability inclusive development and humanitarian action. Back in 2015, on December 3rd, IDA joined UK to have a very first exploratory meeting in which we tried to explore interest and motivation from the donors and foundations for something like this. We believed between UK and IDA back then that this is needed. It is needed because we recognize that there is not enough commitment to especially financial implementation of the political agreements that were made by the world leaders. Simply, there is not enough financial resources put in disability and in implementation of CRPD in the global South countries. We recognize also the difference between implementation of CRPD and, for example, implementation of CRC or CEDAW, and recognize that something simply does not compute. We need to change something, and hence we established a GLAD Network. From that moment on, GLAD Network is co-chaired between from one side IDA as a standing co-chair, and then we had a variety of countries on the other side. We had first UK, Australia, then back to UK, then Norway, and now we are enjoying partnership with the US government. So far, we managed to grow significantly and have 45 members that are working together on the main goals of the GLAD. And what are simply goals? Goals are to exchange information and knowledge, to improve the way that we are doing business, to sustain commitment of the donors that are already committed to disability, and also to increase number of those donors that are still not yet with us and that are not still investing in disability inclusive development and humanitarian action. The network meets once a year in person, and we just had the pleasure to do so in Brussels. And I want to thank European Disability Forum and European Commission for inviting us and for hosting this important meeting. And today, again, in continuation of that important meeting, we are coming together. GLAD also achieved a number of objectives. For example, besides growth in a membership, we successfully advocated for establishment of the disability marker. I'm happy that the previous speaker from European Commission referenced disability marker, but this is a European marker, but we try to establish a DAC marker that is clearly on disability. This was very quickly achieved. Unfortunately, marker is voluntary in nature, and this is something that we can look at and work on together in the future. Besides that, GLAD came together to basically influence different processes in the UN, such as supporting UNDIS, establishment of the UNDIS, or supporting really strongly the conversation around data and disability disaggregation within the UN and broadly. So in many occasions, GLAD was very active. Also very important to recognize the links between Global Disability Summit and the GLAD. In a way, GDS also started with the UK government, and I mean directly started with the UK government by hosting the first ever Global Disability Summit in 2018 in London that had really significant results. And we can, in disability movement globally, we are marking that day as a switch between the first phase and the second phase of global disability advocacy. So a lot of things have been achieved by GLAD, by support of the GLAD, by family of the GLAD members, and simply from that motivation that comes from network. A couple of more points. GLAD is facilitating a regular annual stakeholder mapping exercise where we try to explain in which areas the network members are investing in, how they are investing, is it core, earmarked, et cetera, and also percentages of funding going in different parts of the world. And that should inform the next round of prioritization, and also where are the gaps. We need to know where are the gaps in investing in disability so that we can try to fill them. We also conduct studies, case studies on direct access to funding for persons with disabilities and organizations of persons with disabilities. For example, this year we are looking at how organizations or persons with disabilities are or not accessing humanitarian funding. And we are particularly looking in Jordan, Pakistan, and Ukraine. I just presented a couple of examples to give you a flavor of what network does so far and what we were prioritizing. In the future, we are just now at the beginning of development of the new strategic plan. So we are welcoming your thoughts and your comments and recommendations. But we would like to, in the future, diversify the people and the stakeholders that are taking part at the network meetings, particularly something that is long-term standing, and that is conversation around bringing global South countries. And this is very important. So far, we were managing more or less successfully to bring the voices of organizations or persons with disabilities from global South, but not member states, not countries. So this is something that we need to change in the future. Like I said, we are at the beginning of the new strategic plan development. So please reach out. We will reach out as well. This meeting is a fantastic opportunity for GLAD to broaden our membership and to motivate further. Finally, I'm sorry that I was not joined today by my co-chair from the US State Department, Sarah Minkara, and I hope that next time we will be on the same meeting together. She's probably the most busiest person that I have met ever. With this, I would like to thank you and wish you all the best during the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. for giving us an insight of what the work at Network is doing and the ambition to not only involve the OPDs from the South, but also the member states, and this all with the ambition to have to implement the CRPD better and to realize the rights of persons with disability worldwide. Thank you very much. So we'll go to our third speaker of today. So we have with us Mr. Daryl Lloyd, who is the statistical and the result advisor of the Disability Inclusion within the UK Foreign Affairs, Commonwealth and the Development Office. So Daryl, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and thank you very much to EDF for inviting FCDO to join the session. We're always very interested in hearing about the best practices for collaborating with OPDs, so it's a great opportunity to be here today. I'll just give a very quick introduction first. So, as Nadia said, I'm Daryl Lloyd. One of my roles at the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office is to lead our disability-specific programs, and I'm very fortunate in that to be able to have organisations like the International Disability Alliance and EDF as partners. As part of our small programme team, we also have responsibility to ensure that OPDs can participate meaningfully in the work FCDO undertakes. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm sure that nobody joining the session today needs convincing that people with disabilities have a right to meaningful participation. As well as being an obligation under Article 4.3 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it's also a moral duty. And it matters in practice. If OPDs are not actively consulted in the design of programs and policies, then there's a very, very high risk that implementation can exclude and harm them. And rather than reduce inequalities, our work can therefore increase them. I'll give a really simple example, which I've taken from CBM's Missing Climate Action Report, which includes words of a visually impaired OPD activist reporting on their experience of humanitarian drops from helicopters in Bangladesh. And this is what they said. There are thousands of people gathering to catch those relief bags. There were persons with disabilities who were visually impaired or with physical disabilities. None of them could receive those bags. These bags should be received particularly to persons with disabilities according to the information provided. Now, I know it's really easy to criticise, but it's also easy to see why humanitarian agencies may have felt that dropping bags of supplies from helicopters was the most expedient thing to do at the time. But had they consulted with OPDs, had they asked whether it would be successful, it would have been very, very clear that people with disabilities were always going to be disadvantaged in such an intervention, and we're never going to get the supplies they needed. So FCDO is by no means a paragon of virtue here. We do have some great examples of consulting and engaging with OPDs. And I mentioned the International Disability Alliance earlier. They're a key partner in our Disability Inclusive Development Programme. And IDA and OPD representatives are embedded in the programme governance structures. And they constantly push the whole consortium to not just consult with OPDs, but to have them as active implementing partners. So they're on the ground, working with people directly. But sadly, that's an exception. It's not the rule. And really, I don't think that FCDO is any better at this than any other donors at undertaking meaningful participation. And that's partly why when we published our disability inclusion and rights strategy in February last year, we had a really strong call for participation. The strategy is framed around the concept of rights, voice, choice, visibility. And by that, what we mean is that it's only by making people with disabilities visible and listening to the voices of what they say they need and the choices that they want to make, that they'll be able to access their rights on an equal basis with everyone else. So meaningful participation is crucial to people exercising their voices and making their choices known. And I'll just go a quick quote of one thing we wrote in the strategy, that our commitment on this. So we said that we will, quote, we will go beyond isolated extractive consultations towards active, meaningful and informed two-way participation of people with disabilities and their representative organisations. Now, how do we go about doing that? Well, in some ways, it's easy when we've got partners like IDA, Disability Rights Fund, Site Savers within programmes. They all know how important this is. They know how to do it. And also from a practical point of view, and I'll come back to this point later, they know that reasonable accommodations are not just necessary, but really you need to have explicit budgeting for them. But it's much more difficult to stay true to those commitments about participation without having expertise, guidance and knowledge. And this is the main motivation for us producing a guidance note earlier this year, setting out our expectations for what should be done at FCDO at country level and at headquarters about consultation. And to make sure we stay true to our principles, the guidance drew heavily on expertise outside of FCDO, including OPDs and civil society. I would love to name everyone who's helped us on that, but I will be here for the rest of my time saying names, and I'll probably miss somebody. It would be very embarrassing. But everyone's all contributors are acknowledged in the guide. And the guide itself, it outlines the principles of why we should consult and what we mean by consultation being meaningful. And we kind of try and break it down to 4 really brief steps. And I'll cover them very briefly, but it's all there in the guide for you to see. Planning is critical. Consultation should be for a purpose and deliver some kind of goal. It's not just a tick box exercise. And it needs to happen far ahead of time, that feedback can be incorporated into the practices and to allow OPDs enough time for them to consult and give sensible responses. Communication needs to be clear. We need to tell OPDs what we're trying to achieve in consultation and how the responses will be used. And all documentation must be accessible, including easy read or large print where appropriate. Meetings need to be accessible. You need to ask OPDs how they want to have the consultation. Do they want to use in person, by survey, hybrid meetings? And that they need to include the reasonable accommodations in those meetings. Sign language interpretation, live captioning, translation, much as we've got today. And finally, the feedback. We need teams, if you're consulting, you need to be prepared to incorporate the feedback into whatever work we're doing. And if we can't incorporate that feedback, be prepared to give a rationale why not, and communicate that back. But cutting across a lot of this, a lot of the barriers, is the question of money. And that's one of the most significant barriers. If teams aren't prepared to allocate budget to the consultative activities, that's going to affect who can take part and what they can do. And that's much easier if you're starting a process, starting new programs, rather than joining later on. So one thing we're trying to do is say, okay, whilst it's not reaching everybody, let's look at the programs when we're still in inception, we're still in design, because that's a bit simpler. Our full guide is mainly aimed at internal audience, but there is an external version, and the GLAD network has very, very generously published it for us. So I'll pop a link in for later on. There are lots of barriers, and we're trying to figure out how we get this work on the ground at the moment. But some of the things we're hearing a lot about are the need to go above advisor level, go to seniors, make them realise the importance of this, as they're the ones that are signing off budgets. They need more advice on costs, and preferably some kind of fund that lets them draw on money to pay for reasonable accommodation. And advice needed on how to find the right OPD to engage with. Not all advisors, not all country FCDO posts know who to go to. So we're actually going to run a learning event on this very topic on the 4th of December, just around International Day. Again, we can share that link with anyone who wants to join. It'd be fantastic to have people along. Again, great to hear other people's best practices and what they've been learning and how they've done it effectively. So I look forward very much to hearing about the other speakers today, about the other challenges people are facing, how they're overcoming it. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harold, for explaining a little bit what you're doing within your department. And it will be very nice if you can put the link to all the resources that you mentioned. Thanks a lot. So next up, I would like to welcome Mr. Alicia Martin Diaz. She's the team leader of the governments of the delegation of the European Union to Mozambique. Alice, big thank you for being with us today. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Issue before. Can you hear me now?
Alicia, we can hear you, but I recommend you turn off the camera because you're frozen. So better if you turn it off and we just listen.
Okay.
Let me check. Okay, much better. Thank you, Alicia.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much for inviting the European Union delegation to Mozambique to participate in this forum. I have to say that sorry, I'll speak slower. That I was a bit reluctant at the beginning because we think that there is still a lot to improve. But well, I think that it's okay also to share our experience and our efforts to make our cooperation inclusive in a more systematic way. I will start by explaining for participants that may not be familiar with the delegations, what they are. The European Union is represented through some 140 delegations around the world. They are diplomatic missions and are part of the European Union External Action Service. So in every country, the fields in which the EU is active through delegations are very diverse, and they vary according to the EU priorities in the country, be them diplomacy, trade, security, development cooperation, humanitarian aid. For the partnership is a long-standing partnership. The delegation opened here about some 40 years ago, and the partnership is based on a common agenda, based on sustainable development, peace and security, and the rule of law and humanitarian rights. We are also engaged together in tackling global challenges such as climate change and terrorism. And this work is being done together in cooperation with the EU member states, and we have 11 member states that are represented here in Mozambique. The cooperation unit inside the delegation is in charge of implementing a large cooperation portfolio. As you may know or not, the EU works under programming cycles of 7 years. So the current one goes from 2021 until 2027, and we set priorities for this period. At the moment, they are first working with youth, second, climate change and support to green and blue economies, and priorities related to governance, peace, and a just society. It's important to mention that Mozambique also benefits from humanitarian aid, which is managed through the ECHO office based in Pretoria. I am not going to talk about why we engage on disability in the sense of the policy commitments related to the convention or the European strategy, because Dorte already covered that. And I think that in terms of guidance, Daryl also explained very, very well the why. And we are very much in line, I have to say. So I will just speak now about our experience in Mozambique in engaging with disability inclusion and partnering with DPOs. Mozambique has a huge potential in terms of natural resources and a young population, but unfortunately it's still one of the bottom 10 countries of the world in terms of human development. And it's now estimated that the national poverty rate is around 62%, with large inequalities, including gender, urban, rural, etc. It is also regularly hit by climatic shocks, and since 2017, it faces a terrorist insurgency in the north of the country. As a result of this, over 1 million people have been displaced, and some 2 million people require humanitarian assistance and protection. And for many different reasons that may be related to health, nutrition, old conflicts and the new conflicts, the cyclones and so on, there are many people in Mozambique living with disabilities, but they are probably not well reflected in the official statistics. And they face barriers that make it difficult for them from benefiting from public services, as well as from development and humanitarian assistance. When it comes to development cooperation, the EU has a large development portfolio. We are managing a budget of around 428 million euros for the years 22 to 24. And Mozambique also benefits from budget lines for specific for civil society and for the promotion of human rights. The European Union has always had projects, in particular implemented by NGOs that focus on disability inclusion. But since 2020, we have tried to make our cooperation inclusive in a much more systematic manner. We now prioritize the rights of persons with disabilities together with gender and youth. And how we do this? We start with consultations, the policy dialogues, specific programs, and mainstreaming. So when it comes to consultations, when preparing the multi-annual program 2021-2027, the delegation conducted very wide consultations, including with CSOs. And it was COVID time, so at the time we were doing everything online. At that time, FAMOD, the Mozambican Federation of Association of Persons with Disabilities, that is present here, hello, Clodoaldo, reached out to us to explain the difficulties that they have when participating in our online consultations. We then decided to conduct a targeted consultation only for disabled persons organizations. And this is where our story started in a way. This was followed then by a first dialogue between DPOs and the delegation, in which we engaged our ambassador. And at the time, FAMOD presented the situation of persons with disabilities in Mozambique. And since then, the delegation has always included the disabled person organizations in all consultations, be them for preparation of call for proposals, and the new programs, the formulation of our new programs. The second aspect is policy dialogue. In all the sectors where we are active, we advocate for more inclusive public policies when we're engaging with the government. This is, for example, the case of education, where the EU participates in the working groups of gender and inclusion. Then also with the member states, we have discussed the rights of persons with disabilities in specific human rights dialogues with the government or in the political dialogues. For example, when we called attention to persons with disabilities in the conflict in Cabo Delgado. Another area that we're just starting is a new youth sounding board to ensure that young people have a say in our cooperation. And for example, in the criteria for selection of the young people that are going to be advising us, which are not only gender parity and geographic representation, but we also ask that at least one person with disability to ensure that there in the small group there is one person, and now it is the case. Another aspect is specific programs. In 2021, the delegation launched a call for proposal whose priorities was social inclusion. And specifically mentioned disability inclusion. And it's managed by or implemented by NGOs that had as primary or secondary objective the inclusion of persons with disabilities. One of these projects was the project Disability, Inclusion and Accessibility, submitted by FAMOD in partnership with the Mozambican National Commission for Human Rights. And this is also when we started a more strategic partnership with FAMOD. With this project, FAMOD started reinforcing its own capacities as well as that of its members, and the advocacy around the alignment of the Mozambican legislation to the CRPD, and has created as well a unit for the rights of persons with disabilities inside the National Human Rights Commission. And we welcome very much as well the support that FAMOR is receiving from the European Disability Forum and the International Disability Alliance. But besides specific programs that can be very strategic, I think that what is more important is to ensure that disability is mainstream in all the projects. And this is not only because of our commitment to promote the rights of persons with disabilities, because it makes sense if what we want is to reach those that are more left behind. I would like to give some examples of how we are mainstreaming. For example, we have a program on support to democracy that is implemented through International IDEA. And through this, we support a consortium of NGOs for the local observation of the elections. And for instance, FAMOD is one of the 7 NGOs, together with other NGOs that focus on media, gender, and so on. So they can give a specialized view and report on what is going on and how elections are being accessible for persons with disabilities. This project has also worked on the revision of legislative proposals, including aligning the Mozambican electoral legislation to the convention. Other areas where we are mainstreaming is education, because we have a big package of support to education. And this includes measures to enhance access to inclusive education in districts hit by the conflict or by climatic shocks, including the training of teachers, assistive technology, training of officials as well. Here too, our colleagues from ECHO are in the implementation of humanitarian aid have also been very active supporting inclusive education and accessible learning environments for internally displaced people. Other areas where we have, or where we are in mainstreaming disability is in the digital transition with a new program with the International Telecommunications Union, helping the government to make services accessible and to train young people with disabilities. Gender and the gender-based violence, skills for development, ensuring that the training facilities are adapted to young people with disabilities, as well as the promotion of awareness-raising campaigns for the private sector to improve employability of young people with disabilities. So this is these are some examples. I will leave it here, and if there are questions, happy to reply afterwards.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alicia, for giving us an insight of the work you are doing and explaining also how the different delegations are spread worldwide and that they put also the disability on the agenda as priority now. Thanks a lot. And a big thank to all the other speakers so far. And as mentioned, we will now have our first panel discussion and question and answer session. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat. And we will have Marian will assist me with moderating this discussion. We have prepared a few initial questions that we will explore as you all write your question in the chat. So Marian, please start us with the first question.
Thanks, Nadia. Thanks, everybody. So the first question is a bit more of a comment. The participant would like to know if you can share all the publications that you mentioned. So I can see we have already some guidance notes from the EU and FCDO, but I think also you have, Dorothy, you also have some briefing around climate, I think around education, etc. You also mentioned the ECHO guidelines. So I think if you could share more of these resources, that would be great. And I think we will be also able to just share that with all the participants afterwards. The next question comes from the Japan International Cooperation Agency. And I think that question is maybe more for the EU or for FCDO. and it relates to the guidelines and how you can maybe help to mainstream disability to other projects. I think the difficulties they are having, they have projects focusing on disability, but they're trying to expand to other sectors other than disability and include people with disability, but they find it a bit challenging. So I think if we can start maybe with Daryl, and then after that, we'll have the OT, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll go on very quickly. And it's really important because when we think about what we achieve, I mean, we're achieving a lot through our disability-specific programs, but when we think about what we're doing, what we say at scale for those programs, the kind of scale we're talking about means doing 2 local authority schools and 2 local authorities in Tanzania rather than 5 schools. It's bigger than it used to be, but that's not really large enough scale to make meaningful difference to people. So mainstreaming is the only real way we're going to make changes for large numbers of people with disabilities around the world. And we're starting to try and do that in FCDO programs. It's difficult because many non-disability specialist implementers don't necessarily have the right expertise or the right knowledge how to go about doing it. And a lot of our teams, program teams here who are commissioning work don't have the knowledge. So you kind of need to work from both sides. You need to get donors and commissioners to build the technical expertise and technical knowledge within their own organizations so they know what to ask for. And we kind of trying to do that through seconding in staff from places like Site Savers to bring that technical expertise in, and run a help desk, technical assistant help desk, which will help advise what options there are for mainstreaming. But then for the other way around, we need to basically, often where we find it's worked is by getting the specialist organizations like Site Savers, like the World, IDA, sort of collaborating with mainstream partners, so they can go into a country and say, you've got your sort of a new school, a new education program. Can we show you? Can we demonstrate how we can adapt what you're already doing to make it more inclusive? And that brings that skill, and you can almost upskill the non-disability specialists to begin get those skills, get that knowledge. But it is hard work, and it's going to take a lot of pushing to do it. But if we don't do that, we're not really going to achieve what we want to do, which is try and help the billion people around the world with disabilities. And so it's something we have to carry on doing.
Thank you. Dorothy?
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, I think, thank you for the question, first of all. I think the more practical, the better, right? To get it really to include persons with disabilities. This is why we have the guidance note, as mentioned, where we do have very concrete ideas on the different steps of the project cycle. Then what is a good opportunity, I think, is like when we come to the non-traditional sectors, so to say, that we get the expertise on how to include persons with disabilities in when we do programs on climate change, or renewable energies. So what we are doing nowadays, EU, or we do more programs supporting digitalization, so how to have give people better access, or to include them in the design of those support measures. Or for example, if we are supporting programs on migration, of course, again, European priority. I mean, those are a bit like in very practical terms, like what can we do there? How can we from the start be inclusive? And then what I mentioned as well, disability marker, again, very hands-on, very practical, that we have people thinking when they design a program from the start on how to address, include persons with disabilities in the program design and then throughout the program implementation. Collection of data extremely important. We have seen that as well as my last point here, when we have kind of experts, you know, in different sectors, thematic sectors, it has proven to be very useful experts on disabilities, that we have counterparts, you know, that somebody's in charge of. This is proven to be extremely important, not to leave it only in the narrative, but to make sure that it happens in the different programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. So one last question before I think we go on break. And this is for Alicia. Alicia, can you tell us how working with the disability community play a great role in advancing the EU goals, for instance?
Yes, I think it was already mentioned that not everybody is an expert, and not all program managers and experts on disability inclusion. So it's a win-win relation in a way if we can support disabled persons organizations to make their voice being heard in the country, in the public policies, and then at the same time towards development cooperation too in the different areas. For example, whenever we are formulating a project, be that in skills development or in the cultural sector, we are very happy to be able to go and talk to FAMOD and its partners and its members to see what's the experience, how are persons with disability being reached, what are the barriers. At the same time, for us, it's very, very rewarding to see, for example, FAMOD being much more active now. We see them in every fora where we go, advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities. And we think that now the next step is going further in strengthening the capacities of the members of FAMOD as well.
Thank you, Alicia. That's very interesting, actually, because I am just thinking about EDF and our own members and how we're always working with our members to make sure we have that, you know, representation of different disability for sure. So very interesting. So Nadia, I'll give you back the floor. I think we're going to the break. Is that correct?
Okay. So thank you all so much for your answer and question, but it is just an opening of the discussion. A lot of things still need to be done. Actions need to be realized. And so let's take it with us. But for the moment, it's time for a quick break. Please, let's take 5 minutes for yourselves and also for the interpreter to have some rest. And we will start again at 4:05 for our second round of speaker. We are going to jump right away into the next second session that will be focused on experience from OPDs and Alliance.
Thank you, yes. Thank you. Perfect. See you later.
Julia, you are not muted. Okay, so our first speaker is Ms. Catherine Naughton. She's the director of the European Disability Forum, but sadly enough, Catherine had a last-minute change and will be unable to join us live, but she kindly recorded to follow a video message. So we will play the video right now, and if you have any question on the content, we are happy to have Marion Steff with us, who could definitely answer that, and otherwise we will come back to you with an answer after this. So we can play the video now, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Catherine and I'm the Executive Director of the European Disability Forum. I'm sorry I'm not with you today. I'm very happy that technology allows us to communicate with each other all across the world, but also to allow me to record this video because I'm traveling this afternoon. But I am looking forward to listening to the event later. So the European Disability Forum is the umbrella organisation of organisations of persons with disabilities in Europe. We're active across many fields to influence the EU to include the rights of persons with disabilities in their policies, programmes, funding, governance. We cover fields of human rights, accessibility, new technologies and innovation, intersectional forms of discrimination, employment and social policies, standardisation. When we laid out our first strategy for working in international cooperation and humanitarian action, we aimed to influence the EU to strengthen a regional level advocacy amongst regional organisations of persons with disabilities, to advocate for evidence, to promote engagement of organisations of persons with disabilities in international cooperation, and to innovate and learn, because this is a new and expanding field for us. So the EU in a snapshot, you've already heard from some colleagues from European Union institutions earlier. The EU ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and notably it's the only regional integration organisation to have done so, which means that the Convention should also impact on the EU's external actions around the world. The EU strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities, the current one from 2021 to 2030, has Chapter 6 focused on international actions. The EU is the biggest donor of aid in the world and has 140 delegations and offices around the world. The delegations have a crucial role in defining mid- and long-term policy priorities in the EU in a given region or country. The EU can be responsible for grant making and management of EU programmes, and they translate into practice policies published by the headquarters, but also receive information from the headquarters and integrate information coming from regions and national context into its own policies. EU delegations have been a special focus for EDF. They matter because they have a very important role in the implementation of EU policies and programmes overseas. So we can advocate for the implementation of the Convention here at the Brussels level. We take part in consultations and dialogues at the headquarters. And we also try to promote and encourage that organisations of persons with disabilities do that around the world and at regional level. We can raise awareness about the importance of disability inclusion in the work of delegations, which hopefully will help partner countries to further implement the Convention. And we can keep an eye and respond to calls for projects, grants and funding opportunities and share them with you, with organisations of persons with disabilities around the world. We're trying to create resources so it's easy for organisations to work with the EU in the different countries and regions. We created a toolkit, which is linked here and which will be shared, I think, in the chat box, a toolkit for organisations of persons with disabilities on how to engage with EU delegations, and also a toolkit for EU delegations to know how important it is to work with organisations of persons with disabilities, and to show them how to find organisations, how to engage with them. And we also have a guidance note on funding, which we know is also super important, because without funding, it's very hard for people to work and to do your work. So we don't intend to replace the involvement of DPOs around the world. It's a partnership, so we want to work with you. We're doing the part at Brussels and trying to create the tools, and we would like to support you in your work in approaching EU delegations. We are members of the human rights and development networks here in Brussels, and we talk with them also and help to make sure that they include organisations of persons with disabilities in their work. We know that not all organisations have the capacity or the resources to do it, but we would like to, in any case, share what we have and work with who is available to and would like to. And we know that the door is not open in all the EU delegations, but as you will hear today in the event we have today, really some delegations are, and this is a growing number, I believe. And we need to work with our partners and our members, because EDF also has members that are present and supporting the disability movement around the world as well. Finally, I would like to say that it's good for us to have these events from time to time, so we can also listen to you and hear from you what are the most important priorities for you now, so that the work we do in the future is as relevant as it can be. So thank you very much for attending today, and I look forward to hearing what comes as an outcome from this event and I look forward to listening to the full event online. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm really glad that that worked well and happy that the technology could support us to have Catherine with us. So our next speaker is Mr. Clodoaldo Castellano. He's the Executive Director of the Forum of Disabled Person Organization of Mozambique. So Clodoaldo, thank you so much for joining us today. So please, the floor is yours. You can begin.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm very glad to be sharing our experience in Mozambique in our engagement with international development programs donors. So I think one key takeaway so far from all this engagement is basically the fact that there's probably not an ideal blueprint on how to engage international development cooperation donors. But it really comes to the specific context, to understanding the specific context and exploring the opportunities that are there to promote inclusion of persons with disabilities. So I will share a little bit of our experience, and I hope that from this we can at least gauge some principles that can help also other organizations of persons with disabilities in other parts of the country in their engagement with the international development donors. So FAMOD is an umbrella OPD in Mozambique. We are basically a network of OPDs, and we've been active since 1998. We currently have nearly 40 members, and we are represented all over the country. Our mandate is to represent the interests of persons with disabilities and conduct advocacy process before duty bearers. And we also coordinate and strengthen the movement of persons with disabilities in Mozambique. And of course, we're also responsible to build the capacity of our members. Currently, we are implementing programs focusing on promoting human rights of persons with disabilities, strengthening the capacity of civil society, of public bodies, such as the National Human Rights Commission, and also other civil society mainstream organizations, so that they are able to include persons with disabilities in their work. We are also implementing programs on political participation. Mozambique is currently going through a electoral cycle, which takes usually 2 years. I mean, the actual elections years. So we are also implementing programs related to political participation. So we are fortunate to have direct funding from the EU delegation in Mozambique, but also we also have funding from other donors in Mozambique through intermediate partners. I mean, the first point I would like to address here has to do with the strategies to engage with donors from an OPD standpoint, and how also how we envisage a better positioning of the donors to in their collaboration with OPDs. So I think in our experience, I think the first thing that should happen to build the relationship between OPDs and donors is actually acknowledging the existing gaps, local gaps in the country. So if we take, for instance, our engagement with the European Union back in 2021, we had a meeting with the ambassador of the European Union, and through that meeting, it was clear that there was still a lot to do from the EU side to make sure that their actions, their programs were inclusive for persons with disabilities. There were of course ongoing programs, ongoing initiatives, but there were clear gaps at the programming level, at the overall cooperation framework level. So, and everyone was able to notice that. So, and it was clear also that the funding from European Union in that case was also not getting directly to OPDs. And when we have all these intermediates between the direct donor and the OPD, we are all aware of the difficulties that it represents for OPDs. They don't get their priorities through these programs. They don't get funding to build their capacity. So we were able to discuss all these aspects and eventually find ways to address it. I will not repeat what Alicia shared as the experience in Mozambique. But I think the first point that I had to underline is this. I think it's important for donors at local level to acknowledge the gaps that are there in relation to the engagement with OPGs. But we also think that OPDs, I mean, as much as possible, should have an engagement plan with these donors. And I have to be very cautious in this because I am very aware that not every OPDs has the resources, as Catherine mentioned, to have a sort of a sustained and continuous engagement process with international donors. We know that it's never only about getting funding. No, there's a communication process. There are meetings. There are demands for information. So the relationship with international cooperation donor is never only about the funding. It's a lot involved. It's definitely a relationship. So we are very much aware that that's not at the reach of many OPDs. So I think most of the OPDs will very hardly be able to sustain such processes. But I mean, there are some alternatives. I think one alternative that we can think about is to actually trust some intermediates and allies, such as international organizations, civil society organizations. So get in partnership with these organizations with a clear end to establish a direct relationship with these international cooperation partners. So it's not easy, and from our experience, sometimes it never happens. So we remain forever as a third part in this relationship, and we never get to actually have this direct relationship with the donors. But that's a strategy that could be used, and at least from what we have seen from I mean, different international NGOs in Mozambique, there seems to be a shift in their approach. So I think they have also seen, realized the importance of having OPDs as equal partners, having also the opportunity to discuss and to engage with the main donor. And also, we think that OPDs should make an effort to hold the international cooperation partners accountable by checking their programs, checking their cooperation frameworks, but checking their reports and to see if disability is reflected there. So I think, and I think in our experience, at least, most of the times, donors have been receptive to this type of message when we clearly we are able to show them that disability hasn't been adequately reflected in their interventions. But what we see now in Mozambique is that more important than any type of policy, any type of plan that the international cooperation partners have in place. I think now, the major donors, international donors, have all adopted some sort of disability inclusive strategy in the cooperation realm. But we have seen in many cases that this takes long time to become practical actions at local level on the ground. So these are very good and enabling frameworks, but if there's not a willingness and decisiveness to support inclusion at local level, like on the country level, that's very hard to happen. So we would rather have a country that does not adopt any sort of strategy, but that does have some strong leadership in the international cooperation side in terms of disability inclusion. That seems to have more impact than any type of plan. So for OPDs, it's a matter of trying to see whether there is a champion within the international cooperation space who can take these calls forward in their country. And definitely, I think that international cooperation partners should do a little bit more to strengthen their capacity in terms of disability inclusion. And this takes me to the last point, which has to do with the lessons that we have learned. So as I said earlier, I think engagement with international cooperation partners is never only about funding, and it can't. So I think OPGs should know how to position themselves and show the value of the cooperation with them to these partners. And also, we know, especially in development countries like ours, OPGs face a lot of governance issues. So, and this is unfortunately, this is not this usually is not a good aspect to building the relationship with these partners. So, because they will definitely want to check it. So it's important to make sure that we have our governance issues solved in place to build this type of relationship. So I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to receive any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clodoaldo, for highlighting again that funding is not enough, that we really need to go on micro level and to see on the field work how meaningful involvement can be realized and have impact and change things locally. Thanks a lot. So our next speaker is Mr. Dominique Schulp-Cotton. He is the director of the Community-Based Inclusive Development at CBM International. Please, Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Nadia. And I'm just trying to see if I can start my video. There it is. Perfect. So thank you for having me today, and warm greetings to you all. Let me briefly describe myself. I'm a middle-aged male, have short dark hair, and today I'm wearing a blue and white shirt, a yellowish pullover, and a blue jacket. I work for CBM, an organization focusing on disability inclusive development, where I'm responsible for our community-based inclusive development work across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And CBID, community-based inclusive development, is a recognized way of working that ensures persons with disabilities are respected and included in their communities on an equal basis.
Dominic.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Raquel from EDF. Do you mind speaking a bit slower?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem, of course. So CBID, community-based inclusive development, is a recognized way of working that ensures persons with disabilities are respected and included in their communities on an equal basis and in all areas of life. In other words, it's also a good way for localizing global frameworks. And in our work, we contribute to ensuring the equal right of persons with disabilities to live independently in the community and with equal choices to others. The key human rights framework guiding us is, of course, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And a core principle of our work is nothing about without persons with disabilities, or more simply, nothing without persons with disabilities. This is following the simple logic of the CRPD that all opportunities available to everybody should also be available to all persons with disabilities. And by extent, this means, of course, that all international development action needs to include persons with disabilities. As a result, persons with disabilities and their representative organizations are at the center of our work as decision makers in program design and implementation. And from experience and practice, we know that usually persons with disabilities are best placed to identify gaps in systems and services and to provide local perspectives on what type of service and support is needed to live independently in the community. As Clodoaldo just mentioned, resources are, of course, to be made available to organizations of persons with disabilities to ensure that they are equipped to play the critical role they need to play in disability inclusive development. And in the end, this is to benefit everyone in the community, including other groups at risk of marginalization and exclusion. For example, easy to read versions or accessible environments in the end benefit everyone. So this is the principles that are guiding us. But however, if we look at the world around us, the reality in international development is often very different. Persons with disabilities are often amongst the most vulnerable people in their communities. And even if the international community has pledged to leave no one behind, persons with disabilities are often excluded from consultations, from policy and program design, and from program implementation. And very often, this is not even a conscious decision. Persons with disabilities are simply forgotten. Or there is a certain level of awareness, but it is unclear how involvement can practically happen. To improve this situation, we believe all stakeholders need to work very closely together. For example, we collaborate closely with IDA members like EDF and local OPDs to take things forward. And all organizations then committed to disability inclusion need to reach out to mainstream actors, like mentioned by Daryl from FCDO, with practical technical advice on how to make programs disability inclusive. With all of this in mind, together with persons with disabilities, we have developed an inclusive participation toolbox, which we launched at the end of last year. And this toolbox is a user-oriented online tool to give stakeholders in international cooperation the knowledge, the material, and also access to partners they need to ensure meaningful participation of persons with disabilities and OPDs in their work. This toolbox, it provides answers to why participation is important, so that you can respond if you're challenged to the why, according to the why, how stakeholders can ensure that their programs and processes include persons with disabilities and their perspectives in their diversity, and who and where their partners are for working towards disability inclusive international cooperation. Toolbox provides a lot of supporting material like checklists for inclusive meetings, guidance on inclusive language and interaction, ready-to-use presentations, good practice examples to get inspiration, a glossary of terms relative to inclusive development, etc., etc. So a lot of very practical stuff. And for further support and handholding and exchange, we have also created a mailing list and a community of users.
Sorry to interrupt. It's really interesting, but sorry, we have the captioners and the sign interpreters. So if you can just slow down just a little bit. Thank you so much.
Sure, we'll slow down again. No worries. Thank you. So I was talking about the inclusive participation toolbox. The development of the toolbox in itself was a good practice example for inclusive participation. So one other element that is really important is that whenever tools are being created, and there are a lot of tools out there, you have to make sure that the perspectives of all relevant stakeholders are reflected as much as possible within the creation of those tools themselves. We had, for example, a multi-stakeholder advisory board of development and disability experts from around the world, including organizations of persons with disabilities, development agencies from donor countries, a regional development bank, mainstream and disability-focused NGOs, to make sure that the toolbox is as practical as possible. So let me just take a quick look at some best practices and simple recommendations for working towards including persons with disabilities in all of our work. When you start looking at disability inclusion, ask yourself how you will include persons with disabilities themselves in the work you intend to do, be it in developing a policy, a program, or a budget. Inclusive budgeting is actually a very good example. Are you aware of the extra cost persons with disabilities have to cover their support needs in order to participate? If you're not aware, there are many ways to get reliable information from research on disability-related extra cost that you can use to ensure you budget inclusively. Whenever you plan for an event, have you thought about how to ensure accessibility of it? You can start very simple to begin with. Ask your participants systematically, for instance, when they register, about their accessibility requirements. This will guide you in your preparations. In addition, you can use checklists for preparing an accessible event that already exist. No need to invent new tools would also be one other point. There is a lot of guidance out there. So let me just point at the tools that are already in the chat box. There are many, many tools that we have. EDF has great tools. Many organizations have great tools. And while principles of disability inclusion are universal, you need to ensure you localize your approaches to the culture, to the specific context, and involve local organizations of persons with disabilities to ensure your programs actually reach all persons in the community you're working with. Most importantly, let me finish with that. Nobody is perfect, but everybody can go on the journey of making programs disability inclusive and constantly improve. So for example, though we're very proud of our inclusive participation toolbox, we acknowledge that we will constantly and continuously update and improve it. And finally, do you have spaces within your own organization to exchange on the topic of disability inclusion? Identify good practices across your work and foster learning across your organization and your network of collaboration partners. I will stop here for now. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Back to Nadia.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominic. I think you were so enthusiastic and speaking speed because you wanted to share so many tools and so many things you developed. And you shared already all the links in the chat box, and we will definitely send it later on also to those who registered. So thanks a lot. So last but not least, our final presenter of the day is Mr. Shuaib Shalklin. He's the Executive Director of the African Disability Forum. Dear Shuaib, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia. Can everybody see me? I've turned on my video.
Yes, we can see you perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for inviting me, and also a quick introduction, if you don't mind, to the African Disability Forum. For those who don't know, my colleague from Mozambique, from FAMOD, said that FAMOD is a national umbrella for Mozambique. The African Disability Forum is the regional umbrella for Africa. So we are a membership-based organization with members in 42 African countries. I also want to pick up on something that the executive director of FAMOD mentioned, that national OPDs find themselves being at the third level of a partnership, normally between a donor and an international NGO, and then a local partner. I think the experience is the same for ADF as well. And we would also like to have direct partnerships with donors sometime in the future. But while we have this kind of struggles, finding ourselves in a competitive environment for funding, we often find ourselves being approached by two different organizations in the north wanting to partner with us for a particular call for proposals. But we seldom have the opportunity to directly apply ourselves as a southern organization. But not all of these challenges manifest themselves in the South. There are some good examples. I would like to present to you a good example of a partnership that the African Disability Forum has with a consortium of Dutch NGOs that is funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. The program is called We Are Able, and it focuses on food security. And ADF itself, for us, our main priority is to fight the extreme poverty of people with disabilities in Africa. Although this priority is seldom shared by our partners, we had this opportunity to become a member of this consortium of Dutch organizations, a full member of the consortium. The program is now halfway through. It's now a 5-year program, and we've now covered 2.5 years of the program. And in that time, I can say that what makes this a successful partnership is that the African Disability Forum, being a full member of the consortium, participated in a fully transparent, inclusive way. And we were involved from the start, from the very inception and design of this We Are Able project. The African Disability Forum was a partner. And this makes a very big difference, because many times priorities are set somewhere in the north, and a draft proposal is prepared, and then it's presented to us in a manner that doesn't give us an opportunity to set our own priorities, or to design an intervention in Africa. So this was different in that way. It was done in a very transparent way. And in that process, we could put on the agenda some of the key priorities for the countries that we were going to work in, such as strengthening national umbrella organizations, strengthening their capacity, their full involvement at the local level, the national level, budgeting as well. And then most importantly, and this is the key that makes this very successful, given that we're halfway in this program, is that we implemented in the consortium as a whole a shift of power initiative where decision-making was gradually shifted to the South, to African Disability Forum, and to the member countries where the program is being implemented. So this has meant that in the implementation, gradually, more responsibility is being taken by African Disability Forum as the partner in Africa and by the national members. So you could see over time the impact of the program as well. And this has been of tremendous benefit to the African Disability Forum, because one of the priorities we had and we could present to the consortium was the development, because the African Disability Forum, let me make this point, is a new organization. We've only been operating for 5 years, or 6 years. Our capacity was very limited. But in the 2.5 years, we have developed our capacity. And let me give you the figures rather that will demonstrate what I'm saying. When we started the program with We Are Able, with the Dutch consortium, we had 2 staff members, myself and a finance manager. And 2.5 years later, we have 23 staff members. Now, the 23 staff members are not all from this project, but most funded because of this initiative. We had other donors that came on board, but primarily from this, and included in the agreement between African Disability Forum and the consortium was a capacity building program, a capacity development program over the 5 years of the project. So I can say that this is an example where real participation, full inclusion, transparency, priority setting, shifting of power in decision making has made an enormous difference to the African Disability Forum. And we have not had this experience with the other partners that we've worked with to date. But there is still the point that the executive director of Vermont made, that we do find ourselves as at the third rung of a project, and we would like to change that, where we directly engage with donors without intermediaries. And within the We Are Able project, the consortium is actively working towards that. And that is a tremendously encouraging experience for African Disability Forum. So let me stop there and hope there are some questions arising from this short presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ray, for highlighting again how important it is to involve from the beginning and on different levels the project that will be realized in international development cooperation. So again, a big thanks to all of the speakers from today. Now it's time for a second panel discussion and question and answer session. So like before, I will hand over to Marion to take us through the questions and answers. So Marion, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, everybody. The first question would be for Clodoaldo and Schweb. Can you tell us maybe one standout achievement from your interaction with donor countries? So if there's one thing that you want to highlight, what would it be as an achievement with donors? Maybe Clodoaldo, do you want to start?
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes, I think one of our greatest achievement in Mozambique is to actually have the leadership of the international cooperation donors in Mozambique directly supporting our advocacy efforts for policy change. So we have seen the European Union delegation, for instance, including disability in their policy dialogues with the government. And we are speaking in a context where we don't yet have a disability bill, a disability law, and we've been advocating now for almost 10 years for this law. So having these partners stepping in and taking this policy review, disability policy review agenda to their most important discussion with the government is for us very important, and this has definitely had a great impact in the progress of our advocacy efforts in Mozambique. So I think for me, this is an important aspect because it again goes beyond just funding, but having also the international cooperating partners adopting this disability agenda, putting the disability agenda in the center of their processes. So I think that's one of our greatest experiences, which is a result of a continuous and meaningful engagement between the international cooperation partners and OPDs. And just to finalize, these type of interventions are not possible when OPDs are third parties, when they're intermediates in the relationship. This is only possible when there is an established direct relationship between these two. So that's again to strengthen the need of more efforts securing these direct partnerships between the OPDs and international cooperation partners. So I think I would leave it for Schwab from here.
Thanks, Clodoaldo. Schwab, you want to add anything?
Yes. Clodoaldo, thanks very much. Just to follow up on what he's saying, like I said, for the good example that I presented on We Are Able, we for us, the full participation from the start in a project had a big impact on us because we could be involved in priority setting and we could present our priorities, and it was accepted fully and embraced by the other consortium partners instead of a pre-prepared concept note for us to rubber stamp. And you often, I mean, we've been involved in research as well on meaningful participation because ADF is a member of International Disability Alliance, and we jointly did a study on meaningful participation and found out that it's not really happening, but it's not really a fact on the ground, and that was our experience as well. So all these documents and guidance notes and toolkits are useful, but unless it reaches organizations in the South in a proper way where there's direct involvement, as we experienced with the Dutch consortium, it doesn't really mean anything. The key takeaway from me, the biggest impact with the Dutch was that, or still is, that the transparency, the shift of power, priority setting, full inclusion, that is for me the key takeaways. And full participation from day one, and not this process where there's a discussion between an INGO and a donor, and then they have an agreement, and then they look for a partner in the South, as we often experience. That is counterproductive. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you, Shweb. Just, I guess, also to maybe ask you a question, Dominic, and I think this time I can say that at EDF, we received funding from CBM International, where we really felt that they have a strong understanding on how OPDs should be involved at every stage when receiving funding, etc. So we received funding from CBM International for our Ukraine program, and we working with our Ukraine members, OPDs in Ukraine directly. So, so Dominic, my question is actually, since CBM International has such a strong understanding on how to work with OPDs, what transformation do you think we still need to see to see more DPOs involved, in exchange with donor, etc.?
Thank you, Marion. Thank you for that great question. Yeah, well, what I would love to see in terms of transformation is that disability inclusion becomes routinely addressed, and including organizations of persons with disabilities into all types of programming is something that has become a standard. And unfortunately, we have not seen that yet. Quite contrary. On the contrary, oftentimes we still have to counter some basic stereotypes that are around disability inclusion. For instance, that it costs a lot, or that it only concerns a few people. And I think all of us in the call here know that this is not true. So for me, the key transformation I would really love to see is that it's in the standard mindset of all stakeholders in the international development community, that from the onset you include persons with disabilities and their representative organizations, even in the design of any program. When you have an idea, when you start thinking about programming, try to make sure that the views of persons with disabilities are included. And if you're not sure how to do it, there are many organizations out there that can support you. That would be my wish and my dream. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So Nadia, to run on time, I think we should stop the question there. Vladimir was not able to stay, so I will let you do the final remarks and concluding the event. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your interventions. And yeah, we started the discussion today, and we saw that there are still a lot of gaps. So we heard about making the donors accountable. We heard about markers. We heard about toolkits that are there to have a meaningful involvement of persons with disabilities at all levels. Which we also still need to put on the agenda is to create links with local OPDs from the donor countries, from national countries, and from the different partner countries, to bring them also together, to make exchange, to do peer support, and to see how they could enforce them, and they enforce their rights to be involved and to make international development cooperation a tool to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of all the persons with disability worldwide and align with CRPD. I think that will be the best indicator if we can see the impact on the life situations locally. And so this is a begin. I hope that together with the donors, we can work more in deep on this, that we can exchange on regular frequency, that we can then close the gaps, certainly, and that we take this on for to continue. So on behalf of the European Disability Forum and the GLAD Network, a big thanks to everyone involved, including all of our speakers, EDF and GLAD Network colleagues who prepared today's event, our captioners and interpreters, and all of you who took time to explore the avenues for enhancing the meaningful participation of persons with disabilities. So everyone who registered to this event will receive an email asking you to fill out a survey, and it will also be directly, along with all the resources that we discussed today, and a resume of the event. Also, be sure to keep an eye on EDF website for additional information and resources. So with that, thanks again to all of you, and we wish you a pleasant week. Goodbye to all of you. Thank you.